Many people living in the Webster area from 1812 on benefited from the ingenuity and bold moves of mill owner Samuel Slater. Slater left England in 1789 to take his chances in the newly formed colonies. He could have been hung for treason in England because he carried knowledge of new textile spinning technology at a time when American mills lacked this. From his successful start in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, Slater kept scouting out property and places to locate mills, finally acquiring land between Dudley and Oxford, where he founded the so-called Green Mill. Eventually, he named this area after statesman Daniel Webster. Slater ran his mills until his death in 1835, and family members continued to operate them through the 1930s. Slater's legacy included building houses for his workers. That kept families together, rather than using the model where single women lived in boarding houses and were employed as workers. It is fair to say this influenced the character of what became Webster. Over the decades, other factories and mills were opened in the area, with perhaps as many as 15 in and around Webster by the 1960s. This work provided incomes for families and summer jobs for the town's youth. Factory and mill work was varied and required a wide variety of skills. Thread and cloth making demanded concentration to detail.
I think the original spinning machines were called mule spinning. There were spools and spindles, and the machine would go from the wall back into the room, and it would stretch, and then it would wind up the yarn. The yarn would go on, thick yarn, and it would come off as thread. So they would just go back and forth, and it would pull it out, and then it would spin, and after when these spools got filled, they would, called doffing, they would have a doffin boy or a bobbin boy, and the other people in the factory would help you out when you had to set up all new. The yarn itself came in spools that were about that big around, probably 8 of them. The frame spinners were, it was a wide machine that worked on both sides. When the yarn was in these big spindles, spools, they were all lined up on top and set up to meet a spindle down below.
So your job, one of your jobs was to take these big
yeah,
spools
you do that, you
yarn,
get the thing ready to go. But
and you're turning it into thread, basically.
it would do it by itself. It would spin by itself. And then
I
it would,
see.
so the job was starting new with a whole new load, because when these bobbins fill up, every once in a while you'd have to put in new bobbins.
So you were manning a particular machine
I was at this
all day,
machine on
like
both sides.
all day, or did you change
Yeah,
jobs?
8 hours.
All day.
8 hours. The thing with the spinning that you had to be adept, and the reason why they had 12-year-old kids doing it when it first started is because the kids had small hands. The hands could fit in between the spools, and sometimes the yarn would break. So you had yarn doing nothing up on the top of the machine, and it wasn't picking up the spindle down at the bottom. So you had to get the end of the the end of the yarn and the end of the string that's on the spindle, and give them a twist. This one was spinning anyway, so you just get the part that was broke, get the other part, just put it close by, and it would spin itself together, and then you had no breaks in the yarn, in the the thread.
So kind of feeding it back together.
Feed it back together, and it would spin so fast that it would just
how dangerous was that?
I never got hurt, but your hands are in the machines. Now, after that was done, when it became cloth, the ladies had a pretty large operation where they hung a piece of cloth and had a light behind it, and you would scan that cloth, visually, to see if, because when you went with like this with the two ends, sometime a big chunk of yarn would end up on the spindle. And then when they used it to make cloth, sometimes you'd have to pick it off your shirt. You see that little speck on there that's too thick?
Right.
Well, their job was to pull that back out.
So they were picking at the lumps.
Yeah,
and,
that's right, the nose.
So cloth could be saved. Like if it was too thick of a lump, though, would they have to throw that out?
I think they had people that
Fixed
woman
it.
that
They would fix it by hand.
fixed it up. The thing about I worked in Packett's mill after that. Packett's was a place where you had to know somebody to get in. If your father worked there, you had a pretty good chance. But I worked there for a while, and the difference in Packett's mill, that was down on Schofield Ave in Dudley, was they were more fussy about the little nub. So they had a different way that you had to learn. That little extra piece that was in there, they wouldn't stand for that. When you pieced up, they call it, you had to piece it together and get that little extra piece out.
My future wife's family got me this job because jobs were hard to come by, training to be a designer. Back when they had worked there for quite a few years, all of them through the war and everything, and they were French Canadian and I'm Irish, and so it was tough if you weren't French Canadian to get a job like that, Well, the thing is, working with textile, you're working with natural fibers and everything, and there's never a dull moment. All of a sudden, they can have them screaming because there's some crease being made in the cloth. You have to find it. It's just, it's not dull, put it that way.
I've always had a love of textiles from a very young age. I used to sew clothes at 5, learned knitting, crocheting, and my grandfather had a very interesting background in that he was a boss dyer in Beldings in Putnam.
Oh, okay.
And he was actually from Belding, Michigan.
Oh.
And during the Depression years, they offered him a job at their new factory in Putnam, Connecticut. And he said he would take it if my mother was given a job. It was the year she graduated from high school. In art education, I would have been exposed to not only textiles, but pottery and woodworking, and I took a lot of those type of classes as well, but weaving really became my passion. And I always joke it started because I thought you should be able to dye something with marigold blossoms because they were so beautiful.
Sometimes the workday could bring humorous events into play.
I hear the dock bell ring. Somebody's bringing in, a massive skid of leather that had to go up to the sole leather room to be taken off. So this thing was huge. So me and the driver, we said, that's it. I put the plate down. We get this thing on the elevator. Now this was heavy. I went and I put a little what they call belt spray on the belt so to make sure it hold, because all of a sudden this thing went vroom, just like that. Now, you're trying to get this up and this elevator's creaking. going up, and I'm saying, and I'm the one that's operating, so if something happens, I'm going down with the ship. That's all I could think of for myself. And the driver stood on there too to push. So once we got this in, we opened the doors to where this is supposed to go, because where all the skids of leather, because somebody has to go in there and take these off sheet by sheet. The thing got stuck between the doors. It couldn't, just by about, I think, 1 inch on each side. That's all we would have needed. And we got it even, but it got stuck. And I remember the next day, the boss of the sole leather room came in. What is this? And then the rest of it had to get out, had to crawl over, because remember, this skid is about this high, floated with leather. It was the biggest one I ever saw.
So this was the end of your shift.
Yeah.
So you got to leave. You got it in there, but it was like, I'm
Yeah.
done.
Well, by the time it was done, I was there till an hour extra.
An hour extra.
Yeah.
But it was stuck.
Yeah.
So there was nothing you could do
No.
at that point. So they had to crawl on top of it and
Right, and
unload each
slowly
piece.
take it one sheet at a time and like cut some of the ends off so you could, just a little bit so you could actually move that.
Did you get in trouble for that?
No, I mean, you had to get it in. That was it, you had to get it in.
Because there was no other place to store
No.
any of that
No.
material. So was that a daily shipment, a weekly shipment?
Well,
How
about a
often?
weekly to some leather would come in, but never quite that big. But I remember that was it. I remember that, and I remember people were stunned. Like even the factory foreman, one of them that came in and said, "You actually got this thing upstairs?" And I said, "Yeah."
So normally the order wouldn't be for that much material.
no, but
Had somebody
yeah.
over-ordered? Was it a mistake? Or
No,
they
it was
just weren't
probably
thinking
just
about,
built like that, thinking that the place could absorb it.
Richard Kazalt had some close calls mixing ink because he was colorblind.
job there?
Well, Cranston Print Works printed cloth.
Okay.
So they had like 12 big printing presses, and they were huge, and they were all steam heated to dry the cloth and to dry the ink. And so I would, one print machine would take up to 14 different colors. And at that time, because it was the 60s, paisley was a very popular thing. So anyway, in the color room, we would get called off the bench and say, "Here's 4 colors you would mix," and each color went into about a 30-gallon tub. So you would fill it up with the base color, whether it was oil or a latex base, and then you would go to each color station, add color, and mix it at that station with a big, like a big egg beater, From there, you would take it to your assigned printing press. They would assign you 2 printing presses, and your job was to keep them full of color. And that was great. And, the formulations were great. It was all numbers. It was easy. And except for one day. One day, the foreman screwed up the formulation. And what was supposed to be red turned out to be green. And I didn't know the difference. I couldn't tell. I used to scare my father going through red and green lights, But I got to learn green is at the bottom and yellow I can see. So, but anyway, yes, I took it out to the print press, and the printer, and these were very highly skilled people who did the printing. He was really a high-strung guy. So when I brought the color out, he looked down. He says, "That's red?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "You're kidding." And I said, "No, I'm not kidding. That's, I mixed red. There it is, And it was actually green. So he went running off to get the superintendent, and superintendent came over and said, "You think that's red?" And I said, "Yeah, that's what it says on the ticket." And then I explained that I had flunked the color test. And so anyway.
Webster thrived due to the wages of the workers, who lived and more importantly, shopped in town. Today, those wages from another era sound very low to our modern ears. Some wages in the 70s were as low as $1.60 per hour. John Wojcik earned $2.35 an hour for a time.
If you had an apartment, I knew, because everything was so close. A lot of people just walked to work, and even my age. You know, if you did buy a car, you could probably buy one then for $300 or something, you know, if somebody wanted one. But everything was so accessible, you didn't really need one. I mean, I marvel today because I see these 16-year-olds in a 2025 car that's worth probably about $30,000. And, you know, when we were starting, I mean, you know, what was ever there, somebody gave you a good offer for a few $100s, and that's what you drove.
Yeah,
But rents were very cheap. You could get a four-room apartment for $25 a week.
Wow.
I lived in a rooming house for $17.50 a week, and that included heat as well as electricity. And somebody cleaned your room once a week.
Donald Wyman worked at B&W Footwear in North Village. He got the job at age 16 from a classmate who was the boss's daughter. He was hired to work in the shipping department. He started at 60 cents per hour and one day decided to try to get a better wage.
The first job that I got in B&W, they gave me 60 cents an hour.
Oh.
My mother was working at Stevens Linen at the time. And it was just a fake, but I saw my boss, Jimmy. I said, "Hey, Jimmy, my mother said she can get me a job paying 65 cents an hour down at Stevens." He says, "Wait a minute, if I was you, I'd take it, because you're not getting 65 cents here." so I stayed there for a short time, took the 65 cents, by 60 cents, and finally I was going into the service anyway.
My sophomore year in college, I told my dad I was done, that I wasn't going to do college anymore. It was way too hard. He said, "Okay, I'll get you a job." And he got me a job at Anglo Fabrics in the spinning department.
And tell me about that, because obviously it made you go back to college.
Yeah, I think he was clever like a fox. So the spinning room, if you know anything about yarns, there's like 3-ply yarns. So what that means is there are 3 different bobbins on the top of the machine that spin down to 1 thread. So you'd have the 3 plies. But this is a massive machine, and as the bobbins are spinning, the whole bed of the machine is going up and down so that the finished product has the 3-ply yarn. And my job was to walk around the machine and make sure that none of the threads had broken on the machine.
And you did that for 8 hours a day. For how long?
I was good for 2 weeks. But there were women. Now, this is in the dead of summer.
And this is in the 60s, early 70s?
It was the late 60s.
Late
yeah.
60s, okay.
So there's no air conditioning. There's no air purifier.
So those fibers are
Everything
in the
is
air.
all over. I would go home and be catatonic. It was so exhausting. And some of these women worked 2 shifts and were responsible to go home then and take care of their families, clean, cook, whatever else they had to do. And at the end of the 2 weeks, I was like, "Okay, you win." And luckily, a work-study grant came through, so I had a summer job, I was able to go back to school, and everybody was happy. But it was a real eye-opener that how difficult those jobs are.
What kind of injuries, do you know of what kind of injuries people would have gotten working on the dye floor or spinning? Like, what were the hazards of those jobs?
Well, just walking through the factory, though, where the dyes were done was, you can imagine the smells, and the floor was always wet and slippery. And I don't personally know about any injuries, but it just seemed like a place you would not want to spend your entire life.
I know my cousins, when they worked there in the 1970s, and of course chemicals were a much bigger deal back then, is that there were some people who were ill from the fumes in some of the rooms that they worked in, especially the finishing rooms, I guess, because there was a lot of chemicals they used in order to set the dyes in of the cloth that was printed.
Okay.
So that was a big deal.
If they became overcome from the fumes, did they just go out for fresh air for a minute, or did they quit their job, or what happened?
Eventually they moved on because there was not a lot happened in the way of fixing the issues, I guess. So.
But as far as you know, some people were able to just endure
Oh yeah,
it.
that was their job. Around here, you knew pretty much everybody worked at Cranston, their whole lives.
Sometimes the work was physically exhausting and intense. Martina Koziak and her mother worked at a time at St. Lawrence Shoe Factory. Her mother cleaned shoes with her bare hands using harsh chemicals. Martina finished college, and her mother also earned a degree and left the tough mill work behind.
But she couldn't wear protective.
She could not.
Did that cause her any kind of problems?
It did. Oftentimes the skin would start to unravel or shred, if you will, but she was so fast with it that she was not as impacted as some of the younger people that didn't have the experience. You had to be fast to do that.
Well, I guess so she wasn't injured. Did you know anybody who was ever injured in that factory? Or?
Well, there was a series of situations that we saw. People dropped, quite frankly, in the hottest days of the year. Oh. But they were quickly ushered out to cover the crime, if you will. They were quickly removed, and we never saw them back again.
Oh,
in those days, before union representation, they treated the men and women that worked there abominably.
Alan Martin worked in a mattress factory.
My job was actually, when I used to come to work, was I had to provide crimp and coils for all the different girls that were working on the assembly line. And their job was to take the crimp, and crimp was a long piece of wire that had intervals of little hooks, and each hook would be tied into basically a coil. Mm-hmm. And the coils, they had all different sizes. And my job was to actually make sure that the girls would receive all their crimps and their coils. And the way it was set up, as each girl is working in their station, they had pegs in front of them. They had 2 sets of pegs. And they would reach behind them. There was a large basket with coils in them. They would grab some coils, put them in front of them, and they would put them on each peg. And then they'd reach down and they would grab what they call the crimp. And they'd have to put 2 coils together, one at a time as they moved along. The thing about their job was they had a minimum amount they could make. If they made over the minimum amount, it was considered piecework. So a lot of them were trying to make piece money besides their regular pay. So if I was late getting the crimp or the coils to their table, I would hear about it.
Okay.
They would hold the crimp in their hand, and they would start with one spring, and they would twist it,
Wow.
and then go to the next one and twist it. And they had to work all the way down until they had all the
And they would do
coils.
that 8 hours a day?
Yeah, some were working part-time, then they had those that worked full-time.
Full time, yeah.
Yes.
Would a worker ever be shifted to another job just to get some relief or from that repetitive motion, or did people stay on that job pretty much for their shift?
Well, what they were there for is what they stayed at. Yeah, I mean, they always had the same people for like the crimping machines afterwards, because they knew what they were doing. Everybody was working for piecework. They were trying to
make more money, right?
Yeah.
So after you met your minimum, if you could go faster and make more.
Oh yeah.
Did you ever know anybody who was injured doing any of this type of work?
Oh yeah.
Did you see anything happen?
Oh yeah. We had it wasn't uncommon for someone who was doing border framing to be taken to the hospital or in the evening, because it was a very small spring that used to connect the coils to the border frame, and if they had their hand in the wrong place, it wasn't unheard of where the coil would go right through their finger. So they'd have to take a pair of pliers. They'd have to clip the wire, and then pull it back through their fingers.
Ooh, and then go to the hospital to get a bandage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. When I was at O'Donnell's, they had this kid that was a great musician, a piano player, I think he was. A young kid, maybe he was in his 20s, going to college, and they had him working in the picker house, and they have these machines that take the wool and they go circular like this with little things like this teeth, and his job was to clean it. But the trouble is, it moves so fast that if you shut it off, you got to wait like 5 minutes for it to stop. He didn't wait, and he lost his whole arm, and he was like a piano player, and it was awful when I saw that.
So maybe a lack of training, or they just didn't tell. They didn't.
It's probably lack of training.
Yeah.
I mean, they might have told him, but he wasn't thinking.
Eddie Zajac is a member of the Saad family, whose grandfather was an immigrant in Beirut, Lebanon. His grandfather started work as a watchman, eventually owning 3 different factories in the area, including North Oxford Garnetting, a shredding and recycling processing plant.
I went up to my grandfather and I says, Papa, we called him Papa. I says, I'd like to work for you. And in broken English, he goes, Eddie, you're a young boy. You got plenty of time to work. Why do you want to work? I says, well, Papa, I says, I want a new bike. He said, okay. He says, back then, he says, stay away from the machinery. All I want you to do is sweep, wash windows, and clean burlap. Next day, he goes, I want you to go to Everett Olds in Webster. He used to have a bike shop. He says, why? He says, just go up there. There's my brand new bike.
Oh, that's
I was
great.
so proud. I rode all the way from Webster to Oxford back home.
So did you work for like a week before you got the bike, or did he buy it?
Yeah, I worked like a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so that was the first time you were helping out in the
Yeah, I
family.
was probably 11 years old.
And then, as an older boy, teenage summer job, or when?
Yeah, when I was in high school, I worked part-time for my uncle, Franklin Saad. That he opened up the mill in the 60s. That was Saad's Garnetting, Webster on Peter Street. I worked there 23 years. I was a foreman.
What was so describe your job.
I was a foreman. I had to make sure the machines, I have to set up guys that ran with the shredders. We had 4 of them, and we had 2 garnetting machines. And we would lay out lots, like 8,000 pounds, 10,000 pounds of material, which went through the shredder, which was 5,500 RPMs. The cylinder ran. It'd go through rollers and it would shred it into cotton. And it'd blow into bends and we would bale it.
And you were saying too, you set people up on their machines, like you would show them, okay, this is what you're going to do.
Keep your hands
So
where
you
they don't
trained-
belong.
You would train them.
Train them, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that
All,
was,
all good. Never, ever to have any problem with any of the help. Never. Great workers, hard workers. Always did what I told them. And I would ask them, would you want to run the machine today? Well, I'll do whatever you want. I mean, they respected me.
Some youngsters found ways to make money connected to the factories and mills, though they did not work in them.
And of course, this was before Mr. Coffee Machines, is that one of my chores or jobs I had, I knew some people who worked there and and the second shift people needed coffee. So I would go take orders from people, and sometimes it'd be orders from 7, 8 people, sometimes 15, 16 people. And I would walk up to the diner right across the street here. It was called Main Lunch, and I would get their orders and bring them down to them. And I would do that, I think maybe 3 times a week. It wasn't every day I would do it, but I did it about 3 times a week. And I don't know, I think I made 20 cents for my efforts or whatever. But it was,
and how old were you?
I was about 11 years old when I
Okay.
was doing that.
And that was for the second shift
And yeah.
workers.
And I think I would go around 5 o'clock to pick orders up and take them. And they were specific as far as how they wanted the coffee.
For other children and youth, Webster was just a great place to roam around and have fun.
It was wonderful. We walked everywhere. It was safe to walk up and down Main Street. Friday night was amazing. We had all these stores, and my sister and I would walk downtown. We lived up here in Dudley on Chowton Road. We would walk.
Friday night was a big night for
kids
to get out.
Yeah, because everybody got paid.
Oh, okay.
And we got paychecks. We had to go cash them, and we'd roam around town after dark. We were looking for guys.
Sure, of course.
Why else would we be out?
One peculiar thing about downtown Webster is that the stores would close Wednesday afternoon.
Oh.
But they would be open till 9 o'clock Friday night. So on a Friday night, Main Street was thronging with people who did their shopping. Traffic was backed up everywhere. It was just a wonderful place. And the other time that it was really thronging was Thursday afternoons, when the Webster Times came out. And what would happen is, in the summertime, maybe 20 or 30 young kids, me included, would go to the back of the Webster Times office, which is right sort of in the middle of where the new police station is, and they would get the paper, the weekly Webster Times coming out, and we would walk up and down Main Street yelling, "Times, Times," selling the newspaper. And that's when there were some subscribers, but pretty much many people came downtown Webster to buy the Webster Times for, I think it was 12, 15 cents. And we got to keep like pennies of that for selling them. And that's how we spent Thursday afternoons in the summertime anyway. There was no supervision. My parents probably would be arrested for what they let me do when I was a kid. For instance, I was a movie I was interested in movies.
A movie buff.
Movie buff. I used to go to the State Theater, which is still there, actually, the building is there. But both my parents were working, and I wanted to go to the movies, so I would go there at night. Oh. And I couldn't get in without a note from my parents, so my mother would write this stack of notes, and she would go to bed, and I would take one of the notes, I would walk down the street, go through the alleys, go to the State Theater and watch the movies till about 10 or 11 o'clock and walk back by myself. And across from the police station was a wonderful block of, you had a coffee shop, the name of which I've forgotten. Next to that you had the local office for the Worcester Telegram and Gazette. Next to that you had the office for the Webster Times. And next to that you had Carey's clothing store, and next to that you had Nell's Jewelers. And then as you walked across, of course, the old post office, which is absolutely beautiful. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of it. That's the new one. That's hideous.
Right. But the old
one was granite slabs, beautiful granite steps, brass railings everywhere. And inside was white marble with mahogany fixtures and brass. It was just beautiful. And then you had the Liberty Theater, which didn't have as many movies as the State Theater. But the interesting thing about it, there was a roller skating rink on the second floor.
What would you say was the best part of life in Webster in the 1950s and 60s?
Well, just having the freedom to just wander around whenever I wanted to, and everything was within the walking distance. I walked to school, I walked to downtown, I walked to the movies at night, and I just could walk everywhere. Then, of course, I'll ride my bike. And it was just thronging with people. And, I was telling you about selling the Times on the street. I remember this distinctly when Cadillacs first came out with those big wings. Somebody in town, I don't know who it was, had a lime green one. And he would drive down the street and everybody would stop and just stare at the damn thing.
Older teens also enjoyed the downtown.
As a teenager, not to get too personal, but did you have a girlfriend? Did you date? Do you remember what you had to pay? What kind of thing? Like, tell me about a date night. What would you do? Where would you guys go?
Well, let's see. I got my driver's license, I think, a week after I turned 16. Okay. And I had a car, so big thing then was drive-in movie theaters. Right in Quinnebog was probably the closest one. And so I'd have to say I spent a good share of my weekends there, Friday night, Saturday.
Do you remember what it cost to get into the theater back
Probably
then?
about, it was at the drive-in?
Yeah.
It was probably only $2, maybe $3 at the most. Some theaters had it, you would just pay for a car, and let's say a flat rate of $5, whether they were 2 people or 6 people in the car. And then others would charge, because there was another drive-in, in fact, it was twin screen up in North Oxford.
Okay.
Right where the, what's the store? Walmart. Right where the Walmart thing is in North Oxford. There was a, again, split screen. They had also had miniature golf right there. We had a miniature golf place at Nectarland that might have been mentioned. That was a great place to kind of go to also.
What street was that on?
Nectarland was right across from Holly Farms.
Okay.
On Thompson Road, where the Wintiki was.
Oh, okay.
Okay, the Wintiki, that was the Nectarland, which started off as kind of a just strictly seasonal place. You could get ice cream and so forth. They had a small outdoor walk-up window that you could get sandwiches and ice cream. And then they gradually expanded it, and they even had ended up with call it a drive-in service, so you could park and order, and they had girls roller skating, bringing your order to you. And that was probably it would be about the middle to late 50s when all that was going on.
Is there anything you remember about being a teen, downtown Webster? Saturday nights, I know, were big nights. Friday nights apparently were
Friday
big nights
nights
too.
was a big night, yeah. Saturday night, well, and they were, I'll say, there were dances. Usually there were dances and I'll call them high school, at St. Louis on Friday, and in the gym at Bartlett on Saturday evenings. Sock hops or whatever you know.
Like once a month, not every
no,
week.
It was
weekly.
It was almost weekly. I'd have to say.
Good grief.
Yeah. And I want to say, I don't know, maybe they charged like a dime to get in. And it was, again, this, let's say when they had the dances at St. Louis, you would have Bartlett. So Bartlett and St. Louis high schoolers, we knew each other very, very well.
Webster, a rich history, a host of memories, and a population looking toward tomorrow.